Hello everyone, welcome to Insights Alley. In this series about startup basics, we will try to understand and learn from insights shared by various phenomenal people around startups, product, growth, sales, strategy, and everything in between. My name is Arun Verma, and let's get started. In today's episode, we will talk to Dani Hart, who is the former head of growth at GrowthHackers.com. They have a varying set of offerings, from a community to a conference and a B2B SaaS product called Northstar. We will talk about her experience at Growth Hackers and how should founders make a growth system and a growth culture in their startup, especially after product market fit. We will dive deep into key frameworks and also discuss many questions and problems that people generally face while implementing growth systems into their startup. So here is the episode. Hey Dani, welcome to Insights Alley, and thanks a ton for taking out some time for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, hi there, and hello to the audience, and thanks for having me.
So, Dani, would you like to start with telling us your story in brief up to growthhackers.com and what are you doing these days?
Sure, absolutely. So I started my career, or I guess even before my career, I studied marketing and environmental studies in college. And so I think the two different disciplines definitely gave me a more holistic approach to the way that I look at growth. But after college, I went on and started doing online fundraising for nonprofits. So I was working with larger clients like World Wildlife Fund, the Wilderness Society, and Defenders of Wildlife, and just really helping them to transform into this new digital age. And so we were doing a lot of testing, a lot of implementing new types of campaigns and testing donation form buttons and colors and, all kinds of stuff. But I think I started there and I really understood that retention was very important when it came to nonprofits. And so I've kept that angle, I guess, as I've continued on to my career. So after I finished up doing the online fundraising with nonprofits, then I moved on to a company called Payoff, and we did personal loans to help Americans pay off their credit card debt.
Okay.
And so I started as a project manager there. And, I like to say to anybody that wants to get involved more in the business to just start as a project manager, because if you can become a good project manager, then people give you more projects. And before you know it, you have more influence than you probably would have if you were just a specialist in a specific area. So before I knew it, I was managing all of the direct mail, which, we were mailing millions of people. And I was also managing all of the email automation. So that was everything from when someone signed up for a loan all the way through their funding and following up after they got their funded loans. So full funnel approach there for sure. When I was at Payoff, that's when I met some of the guys that I went to Growth Hackers with. And so, I met Sean for coffee once and we hit it off. We both agreed that activation was the most important lever when it comes to growth and, kind of had a bonding experience over that. And I started just trying to figure out what projects I can manage at Growth Hackers. And before I knew it, I was helping plan a 400-person conference and helping to, craft the agenda for that and helping to launch our new software and maintain our community and make sure that, the engagement's high there. And so we've had a variety of different growth objectives at Growth Hackers. And I'm actually just now, this is my first week post Growth Hackers. So I did leave last week. And so now I'm going to be consulting on my own and also spending some time with an old colleague of mine working on a project to help determine burnout based on personality attributes. So it's a little bit different, but I think it's going to just, be another tool in my tool belt. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot there.
Sounds great. Best of luck for that. So
thank you.
So Dani, in this conversation, let's take B2B SaaS as a focal point, like for the insights that you're going to share. Sounds good?
Sure.
Okay. So let's start with when should founders should be thinking of growth? It's a very common advice that you should not do it before you have achieved product market fit. But could you share why should you not be building your growth systems or your growth team before you've achieved product market fit?
Sure. Yeah, I think the simplest way to say it is that if you are trying to grow a product that does not provide value to a market, then you're going to be wasting your time, because you will be spending a lot of money. It will be really hard. It'll be getting each customer on the phone, trying to convince them with a product that you might not even have available yet. Right. And that kind of work needs to happen, but it's going to be a lot more frustrating if you start trying to, put the tactics before the value that you are actually providing to customers. And so I think it starts there, really understanding what is that value and who are you providing it to? And if you don't have the answers to those questions, then start there. And there's simple ways to do this. And by simple, I mean simple ways to assess it. I don't think it's simple to achieve product market fit.
Exactly.
By any point, I think it's about 90% of startups or something like that, fail. And a majority of it is because they didn't have the market to satisfy. And so when you think about product market fit, you also need to think about there's two parts to that equation. There's the product, but then there's also the market. So is the market ready for you? Sometimes there's a lot of visionaries out there that want to create a product and see the need for it, but they don't have the market that's developed yet. And so that can take time as well, and effort as well. And so there's two parts to that equation. And if your market is small, then your growth rate is going to be small, right? You're not going to capture a Facebook size audience if you're going after a very niche market. So, thinking about those kinds of things before you go into growth is going to make your job a lot easier, and you're going to spend a lot less time and money trying to do it.
Right. So how should you objectively define product market fit? Because product is always changing even after you have achieved product market fit, obviously. So is it okay, we have achieved X number of customers, then we can say, okay, we have achieved product market fit? Or is it X number of paying customers, or X number of successful customers, or is it certain number of retention metrics? What exactly? How should you be thinking about this?
Yeah, I think everything that you mentioned, there's validity in measuring those things, and you will start to get a feel for, if I have only 2 customers and they're not being successful, then okay, well, that's probably not a good indicator. But I think by measuring all of those things, you do start to get empathy for your customers, and you start to really understand, is this stuff flying off the shelves, and are people spreading it? Are they talking about it with their peers? And that's, I think, a good indicator, like a leading indicator of growth, is if people are talking about your product. Because if they're talking about it, then that means they see enough value to be able to explain it to somebody else. And so what you want to be able to do is then capture that. How are they explaining it? And is it a must-have for them? So there's a survey that Sean Ellis had put together back when he would actually go and assess whether or not, companies would have product market fit. And he used a set of questions, and I can share the link with you so you can share it with your audience.
Sure.
But the primary questions are, is this product a must-have for you? And it's basically asking, would you be very disappointed if this went away? And if someone responds very disappointed, then that's that feeling of product market fit, right? They're going to be really upset if it's gone. And so when you ask that question, then try to understand, for the people that are very disappointed, how are they explaining your product, and how are they referring their friends to your product? Because that information is going to give you so much insight into how you should be messaging different groups of people. And then that can help spiral how you actually find product market fit. But Sean, he likes to put a measurement of 40% more, or of very disappointed people, people checking that they would be very disappointed, for, an audience of hundreds of people. But if you don't have those hundreds of people, then start with customer interviews and get that insight that I'm talking about, and then start to put that into your growth system, right? I mean, that's like the foundation of it. But
even in your copywriting process, your landing pages, your sales material, everything, those nuggets would be very beneficial. Makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's assume after so much hard work, like founders have finally reached a product market fit stage. So I was reading a lot of stuff from you and Sean. So you guys advocate North Star metric and having a very clear objective set for your growth process. Would this North Star metric and growth objective would be the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. So the North Star metric actually started with Facebook, and they did initially monthly active users, and then they changed it to daily active users as they started to get bigger.
Right.
And what they did was they said, how are we showing value to consumers? And so for them, they think that it's active users on their platform, and
Right.
now that could be debated for sure. But I think the premise of the idea is still very much important, because as teams grow, and once you get past 10 employees, and then you start getting bigger and bigger, and you've already validated that product market fit, well, how are you measuring that your team as a whole is approaching customer value in the same way? And what I've found, at least from working at different companies, is that marketing starts to have their own incentives, and then sales has their own incentives. Product just wants to get stuff out the door. And you can start to see that these silos start to form, and then everybody has their own metrics that they're accountable for. And so it can be conflicting on the inside to try to get something done that is really delivering value to a customer, but then product saying, it's not on our roadmap, we're not going to make it happen. But if you have, a team that's really focusing on this North Star metric, so, a lot of times for SaaS and B2B, it is some kind of active usage, because you want them to come back. And you can look at that and you can say, hey, they came back month and month, time and time again, and they're using our product, and you're looking at retention. And that's a great way to look at things. But at the same time, it is a lagging indicator, right? You're not going to know until like 4 months down the road whether or not that person has stayed retained over the months. And then also, getting revenue in the door is also important, but typically not what we would put as a North Star metric, because, someone might pay, but are they really getting value? And are they going to come back and use the product time and time again? Again, it's not an explicit measure of that. So for a North Star metric, you'd really want it to show we deliver value to our customer in this way, and this is how we measure it. And so, there's a lot of different examples, like the marketplace, right, where you have Airbnb, they have nights booked. It would be their North Star metric, because both sides of the marketplace are getting value at that intersection point. Right. But for a SaaS company, it's really, hey, how many times does this person have to log in every, is it every week? Is it every month? Is it every day? And then understanding what active actually means for your company. So, go ahead.
Yeah. So for example, let's say it's a analytics tool. So it could be something on the lines of report views. I think Mixpanel or Amplitude, they guys used to have this kind of metric earlier in the day. If it's a marketing tool, obviously it could be campaign sent or campaign delivered, those kind of metric.
Right. No, you're right. And Amplitude, they did a recent article on the North Star metric and everything there. And they talked about how the number of queries that someone actually performs within Amplitude is their North Star metric. So if someone's coming in and they're, trying to understand more about their product usage by querying within Amplitude, then Amplitude thinks that they are getting more value out of the product, which, from my own firsthand experience, yes, that's very true. The more queries I ran, the more I was getting out of it. And
even in case of North Star also, it could be something on the like how many sprints the team is having, or maybe ideas logged in, something on those lines. Yeah, but you have to test them around. Okay.
Yeah, for North Star, we had a collection of different events that were happening, and so you could you could log in and post a comment on one of the idea cards, and that would count as an active user, whereas maybe creating an objective would also count. Like, there's so many different ways that individuals could get value out of the product that we kind of had a mixed blend of different events. And so that's why I say it's really important for someone to know their own active use case and then be able to build the North Star metric around that. And I know that's kind of daunting too, especially if you don't even have the analytics set up first. So I would definitely recommend make sure that you have individual level tracking abilities, using the segments with the amplitudes or mixed panel or whatever you're using, but make sure you can see the activity that a user is taking in your product, because that's going to be the foundation of even creating a North Star metric. And then the next most important thing is communicating why this North Star metric is so important to your entire company.
Yeah.
And, make sure if people have questions that they feel open to ask them, because if one person doesn't understand the value of it within the organization, then they might be the person that's dragging it down and not helping, reach the end goal of growing that North Star metric.
So
and what we would do too at GrowthHackers was obviously we had different assets that we could grow at any given point, and depending on the time of the year and what was going on, we wanted to focus on different parts of the business. And so we would set objectives. And so objectives are a little bit different from a North Star metric in that they're short term. So we would say for the next 4 to 6 weeks or, however long, we are going to focus on activation for North Star. And then as a team, every week we're coming around and we're saying, what did we learn in this week about the objective that we're trying to achieve? We may have launched 3 tests and they all failed, but what have we learned collectively? Are we even focusing on the right objective? And, Brian Balfour is famous for the zoom in, zoom out approach, where you can zoom in really, really, close onto one objective and try to understand how to grow that objective, but then zooming back out to look at the whole growth system and say, is this still the right place to be focusing our efforts on? And then diving back in, fixing that next problem and zooming back out. So it's a constant zoom in, zoom out approach that we used. And I think it's really important to have that holistic approach.
Right. So entire team is focused on the North Star metric, but obviously the overall health of the business is centered around ARR or MRR. So who should be the one thinking about that and optimizing for that?
I mean, I think that it absolutely depends on the business, because, there's funding rounds and that kind of thing.
Yeah, because
where maybe sometimes you can invest a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I think it's a blend. I think that there are reasons against the North Star metric, and by against I mean it's really, if you only focus on the North Star metric, then there is the chance of not reaching AR goals and that kind of thing. So you do need to still run a business, right? But when we say implement a North Star metric, we're not saying ignore everything else. It's this is how you can bring additional focus and that team collaboration that I was mentioning earlier. But I do think the more transparency in a business that you have around these things and the goals that you have, the more bought in your team's going to be. And, at times that's hard, right? That's really hard for some founders to be transparent and open about that. But, every week we knew at our all hands where everything stood. And
I've seen that. Good example.
Right. And
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, and if people don't feel comfortable with the point at which the business is in, then they can raise their hand and they can talk about it, or they can say, hey, you know what, this isn't for me. But at the end of the day, you want the people that are going to believe in the leadership and believe in the open transparency enough to stay. And those are the types of employees that you want and will work hard because they're there for the mission of the business. Yes, a paycheck's nice, but if they want to fix what you're working on. So.
Right. Absolutely. Makes sense. So let's dive into the growth process itself. So you guys have mentioned ideas, prioritization, test, and analyze, and how testing drives the engine of growth.
Yeah. So, short story is that a growth process is a feedback loop. So when a team comes up with ideas, anybody should be able to have an idea, right? But we actually take our growth process and we put it around an objective, and that helps formalize things a little bit. So when we say, hey, come up with ideas, it's not come up with any idea ever. We don't want to stop that from happening, but focused ideation, I think, is really, really helpful. because it makes everything else a lot easier. It makes it easier to prioritize, because then you're prioritizing against the same goal, you're testing for the same results, and then you're analyzing based on, a comparative scale of how did this idea perform against another idea, or all of these tests are not getting us anywhere. We need to really think about whether or not this is the right objective, or if we can get more ideas from another part of the business, because whatever's happening isn't working. So it really is that feedback loop and continuing to keep that thing rolling. And so, if that means, like, for example, I was the growth master at GrowthHackers, which is super meta, but, talking about like when we didn't have ideas. So if I got to a growth meeting, we had our growth meetings every week, and our team didn't add any ideas, or maybe they added one, then I would either individually talk to people and say, hey, like, let's go on a brainstorming walk, or maybe host a brainstorming session, even though brainstorming sessions can also get a little, a little hairy when everybody starts to kind of come up with the same ideas and there's no difference in opinion. So I'd like to take both approaches and put a little bit of urgency in hey, we need to figure out some ideas to test here, to see if this is the right objective to be focusing on or not. So that's kind of how we would approach it. But, there's probably at least 20 minutes of conversation that I could go into for each of the different parts of the process.
Right. I've seen that method working quite very well, that you just limit the time that you are given as each individual person. Okay, suggest me some ideas. How should we do X? And whatever crazy idea that people can come up with, they could be very good as well. So yeah, I've seen that. That makes sense.
Also, yeah.
So how do you prioritize? So let's say you have a bunch of awesome growth ideas, some crazy ones as well. So do you go after low-hanging fruits? Or I know you guys have made structure around that also. But is it low-hanging fruits, or what about those experiments which require, let's say, more resources and even more time period as well, which could potentially be very much beneficial down the line?
Yeah, so we've approached this a few different ways internally, just because, we test our own process and continuously try to make it better. And I think everybody should, if you don't have a process to start, then start with one of the ones that we've outlined and then cater from there. It's better to start with something. But for prioritization, we use the ICE framework, which is a combination of the impact that the idea will have, the confidence that we have that it will work, and then the ease. So how easy is this to implement, right? And so for each of those, I like to say, okay, answer your 0 to 10, or however you want to rank them. Answer that based on the objective that you are trying to reach, because if you are then looking at all of the ideas and all of the ICE scores, then you can say, hey, these are all prioritized based on the same objective. And then you can start to say, if there's an outlier where one's much higher, then let's dig into that. But at the end of the day, we've always used a nomination process. And so we use ICE more to guide than we do to finalize our decisions. And I think part of that is the stage of the company that we were at. We were still very much early stage, trying to figure it out, not a big team. But if you start to have a lot of data, and you can actually build entire systems around prioritization and say, looking at past open rates, past engagement levels, and using that information to build your hypothesis and your ICE scores for moving forward. Now, in terms of low-hanging fruit, there's going to be ideas that the ease score is a 10, and it's just super easy to implement, and there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. So let's just get it done, even if that means one person kind of just taking it home and finishing that idea. Now, what we usually would do is, if we had, a bunch of new features coming out or something like that were more on the product roadmap and not necessarily in our growth, process, then we would basically just say, do we have the engineering resources to make this possible? Or do we think it's important enough to pull them away from what they're doing? So we would have those conversations in person. It wasn't like one person decided and that was that. It was, people would have strong opinions and we would debate it, but at the end of the day, we're still a team. And so we would have to come up with the best solution possible and then implement from there.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense. You mentioned you used to have growth meetings weekly. So I wanted to ask, how do you increase the speed of your experimentation and testing process? So like, is it a equation of just, focus and relentless execution, or are there any other variables to it?
Yeah, what I find is that most companies, their biggest challenge is getting started with this kind of process and getting the right people in the room together. So
Okay.
is there a cross-functional team that's represented, and can we actually get one test across the finish line? And so to start, maybe that's bi-weekly. We would do weekly because we could get at least one test across the finish line in a week. And so we'd like to keep that cadence. But also if it came down to it where we said, look, guys, we just don't have the resources to implement any more tests, we're still kind of backlogged from the ones that we haven't gotten across the finish line, then there's been times where we say, okay, well, what did we learn this week? And we still use that meeting to have a productive conversation. And maybe we even table an idea that was still in the backlog that maybe doesn't make sense to implement anymore. Okay. And just as a team, kind of figure out, what are the ideas that we want to move forward? How can we increase this, the rate at which we're testing? And it usually comes down to resources, right? Like there's very few times where it's not due to resources. It's either engineering resources, marketing, design, and we don't want to implement tests poorly just because we're trying to get them done quickly so that we can increase that tempo. So if you're planning on at first, yes, I think you should say, have a goal to start with one test. Right. And then from there, we think that we can get to about 3 tests, and maybe that's bi-weekly or something like that. And then, then we're going to need to reevaluate if we need to add more resources to the team or what, because you can't just continue to grow that rate of testing without putting some more resources behind it. And that doesn't necessarily mean like, hey, we're going to go hire new people, but it could just be pulling people in from different parts of the team, depending on how large your organization is, or maybe pulling in a freelancer to do some work and see if maybe this new channel does work after all. Right. And then you can invest more into it. But it all starts with resources. And so that, and then also ideas, right? The rate at which you can ideate. You want to increase that as well, because that you don't necessarily need the resources for. But if you start to ideate more and more, your ideas will get better over time, because you just start thinking in a different way of how can we implement this? And, we couldn't implement it that way, but we can implement it this way. So you start to think about things like execution and, your team and how they're operating together in order to make that whole process more efficient.
Right. Getting started and then being consistent is much more important than you can just think about, how to increase. Makes sense. How do you guys think about hypothesis? So you have a North Star metric, you have an objective. How do you actually craft that hypothesis?
Yeah. So for the hypothesis, it's really looking at our objectives. That's kind of how we frame them. So if if you're trying to improve activation rate, well, how is your idea going to improve that? And even within North Star, we have if we do this rate will increase by this much, right? So it's kind of just a framework to kind of fill in the gaps. But then, so we have that primary hypothesis, and we just about always would add secondary benefits, right? So maybe, especially with activation, it's really hard to get one idea that just like takes off and increase activation rate, especially for a product like North Star, where we're trying to get people to adopt a whole new process. There's a lot of barriers to entry for us. And so it might come into the form of feedback from customers and the perception that we give into the market. There's a lot of secondary benefits that we can add to any idea, so that even if it is a failure by the standard primary hypothesis, we can still learn from the secondary benefits that come with that idea. But we always measure first against the hypothesis, and that's how we'll decide if it's a winner or loser. But in my book, losing tests are almost better than winning tests, because you learn something from it, and you learn from every aspect of it, from implementation and execution to, like, did your team get this done on time? Was it implemented in the same way that the person wrote? Like, there's just so many different factors, and you can break those down, but you don't typically do that with a success because you're like, hey, it worked. That's awesome.
Right.
Let's move on to the next one, or let's double down and do it again, But by kind of dissecting the failures, you can learn a little bit as well. So
talking about winners and losers. So I have had this problem. So let's say I'm doing a growth experiment and I had predicted that doing X would increase my metric by, let's say, 15%. But in actual, when we completed the experiment, it only grew 10%. So is it a success or is it a failure? How do you make that demarcation? Obviously, let's say if the metric increased just by 0.2%, yes, it's a positive increase, but that doesn't make any sense. But so how do you make that demarcation? Is it a success or is it a failure?
I think that that's a really good question, and something that we've even debated at Growth Hackers ourselves, because, you don't want to just say, mark this up as a failure because it didn't do anything, but at the same time, it wasn't really, up to the standard of the hypothesis. So, I think that's where an analysis where you're writing down those types of thoughts of, hey, this didn't work according to our hypothesis, but we did learn this, and kind of keep with that framework. And you might consider that it is a win after all, because when you are analyzing it, you'd say, yes, I would do this again or whatever. Then it's up to your team. Just have that conversation and be open about it. And don't say, oh, well, I changed my hypothesis and now it worked, right? But just make comments of that and keep a dialogue open about it. And I think that's the best way to kind of face that, because it really will depend on every team. And sometimes people really will want to know, did it work according to this hypothesis? I know larger teams have the resources to be pretty exact about what they're doing, but in an early stage SaaS company, you don't have that time and luxury.
Right.
And also, like, that worked. Okay, let's move on.
Right. And also, I think qualitative learnings matter a lot in just deciding, okay, was it a success or not? How do you guys think about statistical significance? Because I have drowned in mathematical precision. So how do you think about statistical significance?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think a lot of people do struggle with it, and I probably fall into that camp as well. But for me, what I use one of the calculators. I forget which site it is. I just Google significance calculator, and then it comes up. Like, it shows you how much traffic you need to have and that kind of stuff. And be smart about it. If you know that you don't have the type of traffic that you need to have to be significant, then it's not worth the time to try to justify that. And for a lot of early stage SaaS companies, like, they're not going to have that statistical significance to start. So what can you learn from every test? And maybe that's not an A/B test to start, but it's for qualitative feedback, right? So asking a lot of questions to your users and getting that qualitative feedback so that you can start to build that empathy for your customers. But getting all lost in the statistical significance, like, there's so many better things that you could be doing with your time. If it's obvious that you have that much traffic, then awesome, use one of the calculators. If not, then just learn what you can and move on, and try not to get too held up in that.
Makes sense. How do you guys think about, like, which growth levers to focus on? Because as you also mentioned, you would be focusing on acquisition, or maybe exploring new channels, or maybe further down the funnel, let's say product adoption or usage or retention metrics. So how do you think about that? Which part of the funnel we should be focusing on?
Yeah, I think this will depend for each company, but for us, what we did is, when we were first launching our North Star product, it was acquisition. It was all about acquisition because we just wanted to get more people into the door to try the product and see where they would actually get caught up. And then it became very obvious that activation was a big issue for us because, a majority of the people would never continue after the first 7 days. So we had the analytics to be able to understand what was actually happening, which is really important. So, we knew that activation was going to be our biggest challenge. And so that was where we focused a majority of our time. And we would build objectives around different parts of activation, and our different hypotheses were basically our different objectives. So, I know at one point we tested, and I know this is it could be getting a little confusing right now to say that we have a hypothesis for every objective, but we had a hypothesis early on to say if a person invited their team in to North Star, then they're going to be more likely to stick around. So we want to increase the number of people that have invited their team in. So then we had plenty of tests that were revolved around that. And then, then we'd move on to the next objective. So it was, okay, well, we got people to invite their team, but then they didn't come back after 7 days. So, okay, now what's that next objective look like? And if you take a step back and you just say, well, anything that we are trying to do when it comes to changing someone's behavior, that's always a hypothesis, until we find something that does work and we get a long-term retention curve that looks good. But for us, it was always activation. I think what it comes down to is looking at your entire customer journey and finding the most broken part. So if you find that everybody's getting onboarded awesomely and they're sticking around for the first 14 days and then the usage drops off, well, then that's probably a good area to figure out where you can make some improvements so that the long-term retention goes up.
Right.
And then if you have a very viral product, then referral might be something that you want to focus on. Just kind of depends. But I think looking at that holistic picture first, zooming out and looking at all the different parts of your system and then being able to dig in and put an objective around it.
Talking about the entire funnel, so I have this interesting, I'll throw this curveball at you. Let's say you did a test and it was in acquisition to increase the number of leads that you get, right? And let's say you achieved 15% growth. But turns out that your experiment that you did had created a way to get very bad quality leads. So which in turn decreased the overall, let's say, lead to close ratio or something on those lines later down in the funnel. So that increase in top of the funnel decrease that metric down into the funnel. So a very silly example would be, let's say if you have a form for sign up, you just remove all the fields and just have a email. So that's a silly example, but I've seen many complex examples also where you just increased the metric around some part of the funnel and that created a very bad effect down the funnel. So how do you solve this problem?
Yeah, this is definitely a common problem. And I think that the easiest way to increase leads is obviously to remove the friction.
Right.
That's, and that's where it comes back to looking at that North Star metric. And if you have a marketing lead that is responsible for just getting leads, well, their incentive is to get leads. Their incentive isn't to get good leads or ones that will stick around. So that's where I think something like a North Star metric can help. But it's not going to be the final solution. But I think that starting to put qualifiers around what a lead actually looks like that you want and start to ask those questions up front, start to put a little bit of friction up front. So that way, hey, if this person filled out this entire form, they are pretty dedicated. So even if they aren't the right fit, there's something to learn from them because they saw something, they had some kind of desire to get into your funnel. So understanding what that desire is could be helpful for you as well. But, once you get those users into product, then asking something like that product market fit survey that, again, I'll share the link with everybody, but then start to learn from those people and see where they actually came from to begin with. And then you can start to reinvest into those channels and into the right messaging.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. So you talked about earlier that how do you guys feed your growth system with ideas? You just, brainstorm with different people. Any other ideas, or how do you, set of principles or set of processes that you've put in place, that how would you feed your growth system with ideas, lots of ideas?
Yeah, I think feeding the growth system with ideas, my recommendation would be to help people understand in your organization how they can contribute and how it will actually be meaningful. So they can contribute by just saying, hey, I have this idea, and they tell you in the hallway, right? And I'm sure just about anybody listening to this podcast has had that experience where they're walking down the hallway, they've got somewhere to go, and someone's like, hey, well, you should try this idea.
Right.
And you don't want to ignore those people because it could be a good idea, but what you do want is for that person to be able to think through that idea and really deliver what they're trying to communicate to the team that can actually get those ideas implemented. And so that was one of the original premises of North Star, was everybody should be able to contribute to growth, and they should be able to add their ideas and maybe not necessarily sit on a growth team or, in a specific part of the organization, but that they still can have their voice heard and maybe nominate an idea and go to, the meeting where the ideas are chosen. And so with North Star, we have, it's like a form that you basically fill out for every idea. And it's like an experimentation document or something along those lines. But it asks, what is your growth idea? Explain it in 50 characters or less. So like, what is the summary here? And then what's the impact, the confidence, the ease that you have on this idea working? What's the objective that this is reaching? Please describe the actual idea. So what is it? How will you implement it? How will you test it? What is your hypothesis? And then should it be tagged with anything? So that way, maybe it's not an idea that you're going to implement right now, but down the road, you want to look at different retention ideas or different customer success ideas. And then you can search the system for all of the ideas that are related to that specific topic. And so it's just a really good way to get ideas organized, because 9 times out of 10, in my experience, it's been people coming to me with ideas, and I can't say one way or the other, why they are or not good ideas, but I would just get so many requests that it was difficult for me to manage. And I also had a day job of, implementing all of the email automation tasks and all the direct mail and that kind of stuff. And so just having a system or a process of, hey, this is where you put your ideas, and if you want to nominate an idea, then come to a growth meeting, sit in, and then you can pitch it there, and we'll decide if it makes sense or not. But in general, the more context, the better. So if you do have an objective that you're focusing on, if you share that with the team, in North Star, we made it really easy to share any objective with the entire team, so that way people could submit ideas for that objective, and that helps focus the team as well.
Right. You know what? I just remember a few years back, I was interning in a company, and what they used to have was a large board kind of near their reception. And anyone in the team can just pin any idea related to any part of the company. And just now I remember that, okay, that makes sense. It's like that only. Getting ideas related to different parts of the company from different people. So obviously, if someone is working on customer success and they have an idea that we should be trying such and such acquisition channel, they can just pin that idea to that board. So that was one thing I just remember. Anyways, so I think a proactive approach from the growth PM, or what do you guys call that? Growth master.
Yeah.
Yep, so that master. Makes sense. Awesome. So let's talk about organized and documented learning. So first of all, what do you record after you have completed an experiment? What do you exactly record? And also the importance of documentation in the testing process, whether it's a failed experiment or a success experiment or somewhere in between.
So when I think about this, I like to think about, if I was, to think about the hit by a bus theory, and I, was erased tomorrow from the organization, would the next person that came along have what they need to be successful? And in my opinion, that comes down to knowing what's been tested in the past. And this has been really useful for us, actually. I remember my first week at GrowthHackers, I just went into the software and looked at everything that had been tested previously. And it took me like 3 days to get through everything. But then at that first growth meeting, I had a much better idea of what had been tested in the past and what recommendation would actually make sense. So in terms of what to record, I think if you have any creative, it's important to show what was actually implemented. So whether that's screenshots of, the website or a PDF of the email that you sent, whatever it is, just giving that end result, putting that into record somewhere. And then qualitative feedback from customers is really important. Obviously, if the test won or didn't win and the results as it compares to the hypothesis. And then anything else that comes to mind is like secondary, but I think also great to include. So, maybe the website broke at that point when you launched it or whatever, just whatever you can capture, keep it organized, but whatever you can capture, I think will be helpful for the next person coming in or anybody that wants to get involved in that growth process.
Yeah, I've actually seen many startups, like, they don't document. So I kind of understand like this importance of documented learning, even not in just growth, even in let's say product decisions that you make and something you have to kill off. So that documentation process indeed very important.
Well, I'll tell you what, documentation is not sexy. So
yeah, exactly.
It is something that requires discipline. And I think when you do have a weekly meeting or something like that, or you have someone that is actually making sure ideas get put into, the analyzed zone, then your chances of actually getting that done, if they're being held accountable, are much higher. But that takes a leader that finds the importance of that, and not every leader does. And if you don't have that as one of your, things that you think needs to be done, well, it's probably time to reconsider that. But understand it's not going to be that easy, because it is something that is reactionary most times. It's, how did that test perform? And then nobody knows the answer. Oh, did John document it? No, John didn't document it. Oh, okay. It's usually when it's too late.
And the reason given is that we have to move fast. So why just waste your time in documentation? We can be moving much more faster. But yeah, I get your point. It's very important. Also, let's talk about failures in experiments. So most of the experiments fail if you're like trying very hard. So how do you revisit those ideas later in down the line? And when do you realize that I should revisit any experiment that failed earlier? So how do you think about this?
Yeah, I think in terms of like biggest mistakes, people typically give up when they don't get that first test with good results, right? It's like this process isn't really working. It failed, but at the end of the day, if you can look at every test, failed or won, and say, what can I learn from this? Then you will be moving in the right direction. And over time, your ideas you'll start to build an intuition around what ideas should and can be tested. And so it's so easy to give up. I think that everybody looks at growth hacking, not everybody, but a lot of people look at growth hacking and say, we want the one hack that's going to take us from 0 to 1, but that's just not reality. Like even the 0 to 1 companies, if you actually look back at their growth stories, they tried hundreds and hundreds of things. Like Airbnb, the co-founder sold cereal at one point,
Right.
Like you can't just assume that it happens overnight, and it does take a lot of work. So I think that's like the biggest mistake, is that people just give up and they don't give it, the time and effort that it deserves.
So how do you think that, when should you revisit that? Is it like a proactive approach in trying every method that you had tested earlier, just one by one try everything, or you have some sort of make intuition around that?
I think this is where objectives can be really helpful, where if you have a specific goal that you're trying to reach, and you have tests that are, maybe failing, but they're still moving you closer, then it's probably a decent objective to be focusing on. But if you have something where it's just like, this is nothing that we try is working, well, then it's time to take a zoom out and look, is there a better place to be spending your time and effort? Or do you need to go back to that pre-market fit stage and understand what is that value that you deliver to customers and how do you deliver that to customers? So I think I wouldn't say don't revisit tests that have failed, but at the same time, there's just going to be so many options for tests that you might not want to.
Right. I can think of an example now that we've discussed this. So I was working with the company and they tried doing webinars and it bombed. They couldn't produce any good leads, sales qualified leads with those webinars. Later down, they tried again the webinar and they produced many good leads. So the difference between the two was when they tried it earlier, they did not have so much good as a social media presence, so they couldn't market that well. And later down in the line, they had a very good social media presence, so they could just get more influx of people and resulting in good sales qualified lead also. The reason was different for the failure and next time the success of this thing. But yeah, just trying it out again and made a very good difference.
Yeah, I think it kind of boils down to the question, like, has something significantly changed?
Yeah.
And I think in that case, the social media change, I'm sure they learned a lot from executing the first time around, to say, this actually might make sense again if we try it, knowing what we know.
Right. Let's talk about who works on this. So we have product market fit. How should founders think? Should we make a completely different team or parts of, let's say, product and marketing, make it a cross-functional effort? How should we think?
Yeah, I think everybody in a type of company that you're talking about is going to be stretched pretty thin and doing a lot of different roles. And so it is difficult to get the time of founders, especially involved in this. But at the same time, it is the most important, right? You're either growing or you're dying.
Exactly.
And maybe that's okay. Like maybe you are okay with dying, but if you want to grow, then you need to put some focused effort and resources around it. And so can a founder be the growth master? Absolutely. Do they have enough time for it? Maybe, but maybe they should make time for it, but I think at the end of the day, it's really involving as many perspectives from the company as possible, within reason. So will product matter? Yes. Should product be leading the charge? Probably not, because they have to build, right? There's building value and then there's demonstrating value. And I think that the growth team should really be focusing on demonstrating value to users.
Wow.
That's a
nice point. That's a very nice point. Yeah. Please continue.
Yeah, but I think that sometimes there will be overlap, but for a majority of the time, it's a very different mindset. And so when you think about that, I know like Sean, he played the growth master role for probably the first year that I was there, and then I took it over. And he's very involved, wants to know all of the numbers, that kind of thing. And I think that that's really important at that stage because it's kind of the life or death of the business. And if the founders aren't aware and involved, then it's going to be really difficult.
Makes sense.
Especially with getting resources too. You can't just say, hey, marketing person, you're in charge of our growth now. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And I think I've seen plenty of teams try to do that, and I haven't seen any of them be successful with it.
Would you suggest just make a new team? Let's say we'll have a dedicated growth product manager, growth PM, and, give him, let's say, some technical resources as well, back end or a front end person, maybe throw in a copywriter. So would that make sense doing it very early on as well? Have you seen any examples?
I think it could. I think it really depends on the team. And I think that if someone can dedicate, an additional hour out of their schedule to growth, then start there. Don't make it like, oh, we need to hire this whole new team and we need half of your time, whatever. Just most people want to contribute, they want to see the company be successful, but it is a little bit different in the way that people work. So you need to set those expectations up front and just ask for a minimum, level of commitment and then grow it from there once you get that first test. And honestly, once people get the first few tests under their belt, it's one way or the other. People are really excited about the process and like the win that they got, or they fail and they say, okay, well, let's go back to status quo.
Right. Yeah. So any biggest mistake that you have done or you've seen people do? So for me, it's been being very academic about, the whole growth process. Like I once spent, I think 2 or 3 days just thinking about what the product template, the experiment template should be around this. That was a silly mistake. So have you seen any other type of mistakes that people do in growth system, either it's implementation or maybe scaling it?
I think from the market, what I've seen the biggest mistakes be, or just the biggest mistake, is taking advice or reading article, listening to this podcast, and trying to implement verbatim what the person says. I think that every company is going to be different. And every company is going to have its own challenges. Right. Now, you can use what people have suggested as a starting point, and there's going to be hundreds of frameworks that you can try. Exactly. But I think what it comes down to is understanding your business and using that intuition with some kind of growth mindedness, right? There's a better way to do something, right? And so maybe it's testing the growth process to start and seeing how you can make that better within your own organization or change around the people that are involved or whatever that is. But always looking at things from that growth mindset, that is like my number one tip to people. And it's hard. It's not easy. But if you can ask yourself every day, especially if you're frustrated. This is like my favorite little hack, I guess. But if I'm frustrated, I ask myself, what can I learn from this? Because chances are, it's either someone did something that upset me or, nothing's working and I launched this campaign, it failed. I get frustrated, but if I ask, what did I learn from this? Then it kind of feels like I put in a good amount of effort and I'm learning something from it. So that's almost enough of a win for me to where that frustration kind of goes away. At the end of the day, we're all here to make this world a better place. And so just remember that, don't be so hard on yourself.
Makes sense. So, by the way, you guys must be using North Star to grow North Star, right? So like any specific successful growth ideas or like learnings that you could share?
I think our winning experiments came more from our like conference. Activation is really hard with North Star. Interesting. But, we've obviously have success there, but it's more, working with clients kind of one-on-one to get them to be successful. But the conference, we used an idea that actually I think Morgan Brown said that he used at Inman News. So we were like, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. And it was extending the deadline for a ticket price. So our tickets went up like right around the holidays. So in December sometime. And we ended up saying, hey, everybody's on holidays. So we've extended the buy time for this. And, now it's just part of our playbook where we will probably use that again because it worked. But, it's just interesting because it really didn't mean much for us to do that on the back end, but it gave people extra time to buy for the reduced price and we got people to bite on that. So, yeah.
Nice. Any resources would you suggest to people? Any books, courses, blogs, newsletter? I know you just said that people shouldn't be, following and honing on to those things very much. But yeah, still, just to update people so that people could update their mental models and develop that skills for growth mindset. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I think that reading is probably one of the best things that anyone can do. But reading, obviously there's things to get started. So Sean Ellis and Morgan Brown wrote Hacking Growth. It's a great, preliminary book for understanding how these fast growing companies out of Silicon Valley have grown and very tactical examples and helps you understand the process as a whole. I think it's great. But in general, what I love to do is read a book that has very little to do with, startup growth or whatever my topic is, and understanding how I can relate that back to the topic itself or my business itself. And I find that being able to connect those, kind of helps me look at things a little bit different. So I think just reading in general, but reading about stuff that you're passionate about. And so, there's definitely going to be plenty of business startup books that you can read. And I'm not saying you shouldn't read them, but I think that there's so much out there that you can connect back. And I also think looking at nature and how biology and physics and how all of these different disciplines can help teach you something about growth as well. I think that that's super interesting as well.
Nice. So thanks, Dani. That was very wonderful talking with you. Would you like to plug in something, your Twitter, blog, or anything?
Sure. So at Twitter, you can find me at DaHartAttack, and that's DaHartAttack.
The Heart Attack. Okay.
DaHartAttack.
Okay.
Yeah, but my last name is Hart, and actually our entire family used to play on sports teams together as the Heart Attack. But yeah, you can find me there or at growthgal.com. So it's growth and then gal, GAL.com.
Okay.
And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or wherever, and I'd be happy to help anybody that wants to connect.
Awesome. Thanks once again for doing this. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
That's it, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes would be available in the link below, or you can just go to insightsalley.com/notes. Please rate, review, subscribe in whichever app you are listening to this episode. And most importantly, give feedback in comments, reviews, or you can just email me at arun@insightsalley.com. You can also follow and connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, etc. My handle everywhere is ARUN11192. And remember, always be learning. Bye.